Yeah, I'll be like at this edge so that you guys are all over there. Careful, don't fall with all my traps. Yeah.
That's actually not
Oh, yeah, I did. Yeah, you are in the wrong spot, but anyway.
Yes.
If you want to respect it, it's fine.
But then we have to all move around. We could sit like this.
Yeah, there is another apparently. No, we're not in the.
Is that what you were thinking? No.
Up to you guys.
I think they can mentally influence the people. I think they're mentally capable enough to say, look, this seems like somebody else. Oder du kommst mit hier ins
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully the energy is not too low right after lunch. If not, we'll try to keep the spirits high. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity of being here, moderating this session. I'm gonna just give the headlines of where the grid is at, because I realize it's a very niche topic for a few of you, and maybe you're not aware of the challenges that we are facing. So we'll start with a short presentation, and then our wonderful panelists will help us make sense of the European regulations and proposals that are there to help us move forward. So my name is González Isla. I am a senior grids research associate at BloombergNEF. We are a big team of we're a big team of like 200 analysts covering different sectors, and we work together connecting the dots between commodities, sector transition, cross-cutting technologies, policy and economics to deliver insights to our clients. Let me start with the grid investment and drivers. And the grid, maybe this is too basic, but it's really the physical infrastructure, the cables, the transformers, all the equipment that is needed to transport the power from where it's generated to where it's consumed. Grid investment, or how much we spend on new capital in grids every year, doubled in 2025 compared to 2020 in Europe. And we don't expect this level of investments to go down anytime soon. This is not an issue only in Europe because we like to spend a lot of money. This is pretty much the trend everywhere. The US is seeing a large grid investment, China, and the rest of the world, with double-digit growth in the last 2 years worldwide. Why do we need to invest on the grids? Or what are the issues why we're spending all this money, new capital on the grids? Well, first of all, there's a lot of renewables connecting to the grids. And because some of them generate power at the same time, the cables, it's impossible for the grid to deliver all the power from where it's generated to where it's consumed. That's called curtailment. And again, we have this issue in Europe, in some countries more than in others, but this is an issue that every part in the world is facing because renewables generate cheap power and countries want cheap power. Even though we've established that renewables cannot export all their power, there are large amounts of generation that are waiting to connect to the different grids in the world. This is an issue in Europe, but again, issue everywhere in the world. And to give you some context of how big these queues are, in BloombergNEF, we run something which we call an economic transition scenario, and it's a hypothetical scenario in which we imagine a world in which everyone acts rationally and they operate the cheapest power system. So let's look at Italy, for example. If Italy wanted to operate the cheapest power system between now and 2030, it will need to add more renewables. But in the queue, we have almost 6 times more renewables than what they will need by 2030. What does this large queue mean? Is probably we will dive in. It's something we will dive in the panel later. But demand queues are lately also a part of a problem. And they're led by data centers that also want to connect to the European grids, not only the European grids, but everywhere. And to give you an idea of the magnitude of the queues, if all the projects in the queues that you see were to really get built and connected, the peak demand, which is the maximum power of countries, would double or more than double, depending on the country that you see. So there is a lot of waiting and processing. We'll see if all of it is legitimate or not. And finally, our grids are getting old. We built them a long time ago, and you have to replace the equipment to make sure it's still safe. And yeah, roughly a third of the grid investment that we saw it was rising is just to replace old stuff that needs to be safe. Spending money doesn't mean that there's smart ways in which you can spend money. And one example I want to bring here, because it's also mentioned in the grids package, is anticipatory investment. That means you're building a line or a substation that's bigger than what you need, but it doesn't cost, if you build a substation that's double than what you need, it doesn't cost double the money. Yes, your equipment will be twice as big, but you don't need that much more land or that much more labor hours. So that's why there's economies of scale when building grid projects, and it can make sense to, overbuild, but also there's drawbacks for financing and consumer bills that we will also talk about later. Expanding the EU-grid is a priority for security of supply, for competitiveness, you name it. We are at the center of the generation of cheap power and the electrification of a lot of industries and data center boom. But the system is not very well connected, unfortunately. There are targets at the European level that would like member states to be able to import 15% of the total power capacity that they can generate. If we zoom in, we see that the biggest economies in Europe are really behind these interconnection targets. And these targets are dynamic. And to give you an example, Germany has plans to install a lot of offshore wind, but if they don't install more interconnection, they will go to the other side of the line, and they will be actually behind the 2020 target. More grids means more money. That's how I started my presentation. The European Commission has proposed to increase the budget for the Connecting Europe facility by 6. And they're very confident that for every euro that we will spend on public money on the grids, there will be 2 euros that will come from private investment as well. So they see this as an investment. But there are drawbacks. We also need more people. With bigger grids comes more people operating them, more commissioning engineers, more equipment. And while we see some countries or utilities scaling up, some of them, and I don't know if you can see that France got a 2% growth in employees since 2019 until 2024, didn't grow so much. Is this also a problem or not? And finally, supply chains, which are another huge bottleneck of the grids. Europe is very lucky in the sense that it has local, made in Europe, made for Europe supply chains for a lot of grid equipment. The image you can see is high voltage direct current equipment, which are needed for the very long links, namely in interconnections, but also in offshore wind farms that are very, very far away. And in the past, there was oversupply, no delays, everyone was happy. Right now, the picture is a bit different, and there's a 10-year lead time for this piece of equipment. And the market is so tight that, in 2027, State Grid Intelligence Research Institute, which is a Chinese player, won the first bid to install this equipment for a German offshore wind farm by 2027. So that's pretty much everything that there is to know about grids in 5 minutes. Europe needs to develop its power grids quickly. They are central to security of supply, competitiveness, economic growth, as we said. Should I leave no? No? Okay. Hopefully their faces will appear later. Hopefully the faces will appear later. The grids package was published in December and brings together proposals on planning, permitting, investment, and cost allocation. I have here with me Tom Hoss, advisor for the Green Transition and Market Regulation, Directorate General for Energy at the European Commission, so very relevant for this panel. Alexander Roth, affiliate fellow at Bruegel, a very well-known policy European think tank. François Berthelemy, Deputy Director of European Affairs at the French Transmission System Operator, which is the company that manages the very big towers and that move power from like generation to cities. And finally, Sofie Eriksson, member of the European Parliament, Progressive Alliance of Socialist Democrats, Sweden. And I would like to start the discussion with François. France is reviewing its grid connection queuing system, so those slides that I showed at the beginning, not only for generation, but for demand, using some principles published in the grids package by the European Commission. What is the problem that France is trying to solve? Are the queues legitimate?
Yeah, thanks a lot, and hi everybody. I'm very happy to be here and have this discussion with you guys today. So indeed, connection queues, it's an issue in France, it's an issue in Europe, and I think the slides you showed illustrated quite well what is, I would say, the challenge at stake today. Basically, all system operators in Europe, whether it's transmission or distribution, face a number of grid connection requests, which is without precedent to what we used to have. In a company, like people used to say that a few years ago, if we had like 2 connection requests for consumers, it was considered a good year, right? And now we are in the figures that you showed, which are not the worst in Europe, and I think it was fairly shown, but still it's a situation that we want to manage. And why is that? Basically, what is the main issue that we have to tackle today? It's electrification of demand. That means increasing the consumption of electricity in Europe, transitioning away from fossil fuels, which are imported in Europe, and moving to an energy system relying mostly on electricity. For that, we need consumers to be able to connect to the grid in order to consume. And here, there really is a challenge to make sure that the most mature projects, the most concrete projects can actually have access to the grid. What we see in the queues today is a number of projects, many projects, and basically we know, and we all know in Europe, because we talk with our fellow TSOs, that a number of these projects will not materialize. Because it's a fact that, some developers, either, they're considering different locations, so they could apply for grid connection in, let's say, 3 areas, and only 1 project will materialize. Or even worse, in some cases, it can be some kind of speculative behavior, considering that grid connection is becoming a scarce resource, and that, if it doesn't cost too much, you may as well, take the connection right, and then you'll see what you do with it. And what that does is that the most mature projects or the most concrete projects are delayed back in the queue. So that's really what we want to change. Today, the principle is first come, first serve. So it's kind of the historical principle. It's like a queue. You are the last one to arrive. You will be the last one to be connected, and goes on and on. And now we really need to change that to make sure that we have something which is called first ready, first served, to make sure that we are able to actually connect concrete projects for electrification of industry, for data centers, and we have something dedicated for that, so we can come back maybe in a discussion, for hydrogen, electrolysis, and all these kind of very important projects. So that's really what's being discussed right now. So we have had a big stakeholder consultation, because obviously it's quite I would say, a big change in the way that the system is organized. So it's ongoing. We have had this consultation. We're still, reviewing all the answers and trying to find the most appropriate solution. It's not so easy when you go into the details, like what are the criteria to select a project? I mean, there are many, many things that you can look at. Like, for instance, do you have land rights, right? I mean, if not, how do you deal with that? But how do you prove? Do you have building permits? Are you able to commit some kind of financial guarantee to prove that basically you're serious? Are you already ordering some kind of equipment for your projects? I mean, there are many, many things that you can look at. And here we really try to find the appropriate balance And obviously, all this is to be approved by the regulator because it's only something that we as TSO can propose, and it has to be approved by the authorities. So that's really the ongoing work today. But really, what matters the most is that we are able to enable and accelerate electrification, but making sure that the most concrete and advanced projects actually connect to the grids.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and it's good for you because you actually know where you need to focus on your grid, but it's also good for investors, which, they know that they can rely on the timeline that you are giving them to connect, which is obviously, investment clarity is something that it's obviously desirable. You mentioned planning and permitting for lands, but I'm gonna shift to planning and permitting for grid development, which is also a very hot topic. And the European Commission in the grids package also has some measures to reduce that. To give some idea to the audience, it takes longer, and grid projects are big, but it takes longer to plan them than to build them right now. So in the grids package, where do you see the most practical opportunities to shorten the timelines without weakening the public scrutiny or the environmental safeguards?
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, the grids package adds to the planning regimes and the permitting regimes that are existent in Europe today. Even on the planning side, there can be a benefit to how the grids are rolled out, because there's the way planning occurs at the moment. It's bottom up. Each member state looks at what it's got. It tries to bring into consideration what it thinks is future demand, the future connectors, how that works with the gas sector, what we might be getting in with through new hydrogen supplies. It has to bring all of that together, and then we try to aggregate it and see what's going on at the European level. That's not always coherent, not always consistent with the policy objectives compared to the grid. So the better the planning, then that can actually have an impact on the investments you need. If you're planning better, if you're taking account of what's happening in your neighboring country, if you're also factoring that you can be using smart grids. We often talk these days of non-wire solutions. That can improve the way the existing grid works, and you don't actually have to make the investment and go through the pain of trying to plan a new transmission line. So the planning itself can also help with grid management and efficient grid use. Then on the permitting side, as you've said, the planning processes can be horrible. I mean, we experience at a micro level. I don't know if anyone's had the pleasure of trying to work out whether you're allowed to have a solar panel on your balcony, but whether you're talking about a solar panel on your balcony or new transmission lines across France, it's a painful process. There are many factors, many levels involved. It can be communal, regional, federal, national, and the different processes at each level. There's environmental considerations, social planning considerations. So for us, we have some good examples in other areas where we think we've been able to agree across the union on good reforms to permitting. In the renewables world, for instance, we've created acceleration zones where we've said, look, you can allocate this particular area and say, we've done the environmental assessment here, we've looked at all the environmental risks overall, so individual projects don't need to go through that in addition and pay for another study to look at it just for them. So you can consolidate the reporting or the assessment requirements. There's things like one-stop shop. Again, even from your local council experience, you can be moved around from one office to another. If we created one-stop shops, if we digitalize the process, you're not waiting for the local councillor to get back from his holiday in 6 weeks to tick the box and approve or disapprove your application. So digitalization, one-stop shops, more coherent planning across zones, these are all measures that can improve the permitting.
Yeah, very needed, I think. Particularly the one-stop shop, because it's a bit, again, to give some context to the audience, you might need to speak to your local authority, but also the Ministry of Energy. If you could just talk to one authority that tells you this is what the process looks like, and it doesn't matter in which region of this country you are or in which, that would also be great for everything. I've been also talking a lot in the presentation about building grids, investment costs. This will come through customer bills, and I want to bring Sofie in now. So grid investment is usually recovered through tariffs paid by customers. How should policymakers think about protecting consumers in a period where we see grid investment rising, and also in a period where we have some energy crises and other factors that are out of our control.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. Nice to be here. I was happy to see in one of the charts here that you had that Hitachi Energy is a big chunk of the transformers and energy system providers. I live in Ludvika. It's a small town in central Sweden. 27,000 inhabitants, and we are producing the transformers for Europe and for the world. So we are very proud of that, of course. So these issues and these topics are very familiar to me. But I'm also representing Sweden, of course. And as you may have heard, some of you, if you have been into the grids package discussion, the Sweden representatives from a lot of different parts are quite skeptical, if you put it lightly. And I would like to say why, because of course we are a very interconnected country and we are proud of that, actually. First and foremost, we think that is very good, and we do need to collaborate and we need to cooperate to make sure that we can transition from fossil energy to electrification. We are very proud that we are very far ahead in that discussion also. We have an energy mix now that is almost entirely fossil free, and we are very proud of that, of course, and we want other countries to also follow, and we want to be helpful in making sure that that is also possible. But what is not okay is for Swedish consumers, both households, families, and also companies, to pay the price, to pay too high of a price for that. And I would like to paint a picture here. This winter, when the Commission presented the grids package, almost the same day, if it wasn't the same day actually, there were a celebration in Jokkmokk, in the most northern parts of Sweden. Kids were out skiing, and there were a big, ceremony when they pushed the button on Aurora Line. It was a new interconnector between northern parts of Sweden and Finland. So that was a celebration because we are proud that we are more interconnected with Finland, a neighboring country. That's also having had a hard time to be decoupled from Russia, of course. So we are proud that we can contribute. But at the same time, after this celebration, we saw that the prices skyrocketed. We have had the lowest prices in Europe, practically, in the northern parts of Sweden. And now we have the same prices as we had the highest prices in the northern parts of Sweden in our entire country because of the market being enhanced, since we were more interconnected with Finland. So people who are living in a nature that's very exploited, as you can imagine, the nature is exploited when we are going to make green energy. That's how it is. Our rivers are filled with dams, and we have windmills and everything, and we are proud of that, and that is good. But of course, it comes with a cost. It comes with a cost for your local neighborhood and everything, and it comes with a cost. But it has been okay for people since it gives them cheap energy. And it's also one of the parts of Europe that is the coldest in the winter. It's hard to imagine right now, but it's very cold in the winter. And it's cold for a long time, and it's very cold. So they can't be flexible, and when they are, using the energy. They can't, be smart and use smart. They need the energy to warm their homes. So when the prices then skyrocket, people are not that happy about interconnections. People are not that happy with energy prices going up. And we also, I know that we are talking about grids today, but I think it's important also to see that people, when they are paying their bills, they are seeing a bill. They aren't seeing that, this is the grid and this is the energy and this is something, this is the taxes. They're seeing one bill. And what we can see for the last couple of years, the tariffs for grids has also skyrocketed. So I think that's important that we see this as a whole. And I think that your question, what we need, I think we do need to have more of. I know there's a lot of smart solutions on the paper, but. When you come to the reality in Jokkmokk, they were happy at first, but then when they saw the prices skyrocket, they weren't that happy, and that's the reality. And that will make sure that in my country, we have the debate now that we want to cut the cables to our neighboring countries. And that is not good for Europe, and I actually don't think would be good for Sweden either. in the long term. But that is how the debate is going on right now. And it's for actually good reasons, I think, because people are seeing the consequences. So I think that's important. And we will, of course, come into the discussion on what we are putting forward now in the grids package debate, of course. But I think to have a frame here, it's we have to make sure to see the bigger picture. It's not only grids or energy production, it's the same.
Yeah. We often say in research that, like, with more interconnection will come, like, hopefully a lower energy part of the bill. So maybe the bill is constant over time. But then things
Or
happen.
it's lower on the one side and it's higher on the other. It's
exactly.
a smearing effect.
Exactly. Which good transition for Alexander, because you've been looking, or not, maybe not you, but Bruegel has been looking at models to soften the grid investment impact on customer bills, and how, the rising grid investment, maybe we can shield customers from it, maybe for a limited period of time. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, of course. First of all, thanks for being here. Thanks for the invite. And I'm happy that actually that Sofie already opened up a bit of discussion to make it actually to not kind of like avoid the difficult questions, because I think this is what this whole package is about. Maybe just before I go more into your detailed question, but let me also maybe just add that when there's somebody paying more, there's also somebody earning more. And so it is then the companies actually in Sweden that also earn higher prices. So it is not that the money is gone. There are also ways, of course. It's a distributional question, and it could be also maybe there are also measures or ways maybe to take this money and then give it back to the Swedish consumers. So this is just to answer your question. It's already way. Well, I mean, if it's the Swedish, if it's the Swedish companies, this is a Swedish question, of course, yes. But if it's a distributional question, the money is somewhere; it's not gone. And I think this is important to point out. If you talk about it's a distribution question between countries, the money is not gone; it just goes somewhere else. You mentioned the question on how to shield consumers. Well, this is one way, obviously. Another way is also to discuss why we have grids in the first place. It's not, we don't build grids for the sake of building grids. We build grids, as you said before, to interconnect the European system, to efficiently, basically, have a trade. I think we are all or most of us are economists here, and we know there's gains from trade, and this is the same for electricity. If there's a high price in the country, this is a expression of scarcity, and if there's low price, there's an abundance, and normally this trade should actually be beneficial. And but there are also other alternatives to that. We can, for instance, think about storage. We can think about flexibility of demand. So these are other ways to make our system, let's call it, more flexible, to use this jargon. And this is an alternative to grids we could think of if we believe that maybe grids are too expensive in certain ways or certain regions. But finally, of course, there are also ways, if we really need to install these grids, and I think this is this regardless of these other solutions we are having, I think there's a consensus in most of the economic studies that we need a lot of reports that we need a lot of additional grids. This is also beneficial for the European system, and indeed we could, for example, think about pushing back some of the cost to consumers in the future. So at Bruegel, my colleagues thought about like a vehicle where basically the financing is especially pushed back. Something has been done similar in Germany for the hydrogen grid, where the state basically is pre-financing some of the costs, and then not the consumers today are paying all the costs, but then some future consumers are paying the cost, because indeed it seems unfair why current consumers should pay all the benefits, of course, of future consumers. Another way is also just in general a higher state involvement. I mean, we know that the future energy system will be mostly driven by capital costs. This includes obviously the grids, and so interest rates are an important point, important cost driver, and usually the government enjoys lower interest rates than private companies. And if you think about investment funds or direct state involvement, could also help to lower some of these costs.
Thank you for that. I mean, there's also more things like the anticipatory investment that we spoke in the beginning, and like new regulatory models that I think are also in the grids package, like the TOTEX and CAPEX. So there's a lot more. But yeah, I wanted to move the discussion to the central scenario suggested by the Commission, and I think, Tom, you alluded maybe to this when you were speaking earlier. So yeah, to give some context, the European Commission has proposed a more central scenario to identify the structures, the infrastructure that Europe needs. And the idea is that this common scenario will guide planning and then propose projects where necessary, and where like traditional grid companies are not proposing a project, then there will be a gap filling mechanism that will allow any third party to propose this project so that we develop grids fast. Because we haven't talked about speeds, but yeah, that time is money here. I probably will say it a few more times during the discussion. So a central scenario can improve coordinate. Let me start with you, Alexander, again. We have had scenarios before, or central scenarios before, but what is new in this new central scenario, and what problems is it trying to solve?
Well, so far, grid planning has been not done by any public authority in Europe. So the grid planning has been done by a body of the transmission system operators, NSOE, and they have done this within their 10-year development plan, the TYNDP, which is basically a more bottom-up process where the different national TSO collect projects they think it's available to push, and then they coordinate this on a European level. Now, the question I think we can ask ourselves is, I think, a question of principle and also an empirical question here. First of all, has this process really delivered the right projects, also and enough projects? I think we can put question marks on both of these questions, but also should we kind of like leave this, I think, rather important, and we agree on this, grids are important, and you gave 10 slides about why we discussed this. Should this be really left to a body that is basically also semi-private and also a bit like without oversight? So the idea is basically that the Commission comes in, or let's say this is the grids package proposal, the Commission comes in and puts a scenario before that, so that they are identifying what are the most important needs, and then they give this down to the TYDP.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted to give some context to the audience. So the two member states that we have represented here, so France and Sweden, their transmission system operator is owned by the state, but that's not the case everywhere in Europe. You have like, in Spain, I think the state only owns 20% of the transmission system operator, and in all other countries, like there's some, yeah.
It's mixed.
Yeah, mixed private capital gains. So yeah, I thought that was context just in case.
Yeah, so I mean, and the idea is basically that the European Commission basically takes a first step, instead of like at the moment the European Commission is kind of like still involved in this process, but quite late. A first step, a central scenario, where basically the idea is also to harmonize different scenarios, harmonize different demands, harmonize where Europe wants to go, and then identifies those interconnection needs that maybe are overlooked in the current process, and then gives this down to the planners. So in the end, the TYNDP will still exist. This is how at least how I understand it, the grid package, and the idea is just a bit more a central step. And I think this is also we should really see this beyond just like technical, detailed nerds discussing where to plan. I think this could also be actually really an important step to a bit like synchronize expectations, because I mean we have to really don't forget that this is that investments are being planned in the EU in different member states by different companies, and this is all depends on it's all interconnected. So I mean the whether in a certain investment in one member state is actually will stay profitable really depends also on the policy in that member state, but also on policy in other member states, and also on the interconnection. And so if we're planning basically in parallel, there's also a lot of uncertainty. And my hope is that if we as Europeans, maybe it sounds a bit ambitious, but we as different policymakers, or as not we, but as policymakers and also as governments, maybe they can with the Commission together decide or agree on a common vision, quote unquote, within the scenario. This could also be a bit of a vision of a pathway forward.
Thank you so much for that. And there's also, yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned it, the unification with like the other scenarios like hydrogen and the rest of the energy policies, because energy is not just grids, even though grids is the most important, I would argue. Tom, a central scenario can improve coordination when it comes like top down instead of bottom up. However, it's understandable that governments want autonomy, and yeah, do you agree that this central scenario can create some tensions?
I think it has. The discussion has illustrated certain tensions. But I'd like to jump on the word of autonomy, because we are not autonomous national energy markets anymore. We're trying to complete a single electricity European grid and market. So it's not that there are national markets and a sense of autonomy is misplaced. And as you were outlining, one of the imperfections of the current regime is that it comes from almost this sense of autonomy where we work out what's going on here in our little bit, and only then, second order, do we take consideration of what's going on in our neighbour's space, or even with the other fuel space. It took us 10 years to bring, we used to do the same exercise, a 10-year network development plan for gas and a 10-year network development plan for electricity. Now, you'd have thought that these two should speak to each other, because whether or not you're using gas in your heating and whether in 5 years' time you're going to switch to electric heating and how that interplays across communes, regions and nations is important, but we weren't linking those up. It took a long time to link up those two scenarios. So you've got different fuels needing to be matched and compared to see what the implications are. You've got cross-border issues. So yeah, I think autonomy is the wrong word to talk of when you're trying to build the European market and carry on with today's energy policy. In terms of tensions, there is a tension, but that's it's coming, I think, from the that sense of we have a good understanding of what we're doing today, and that's enough. But again, I mean, the slides, the queues, the waiting times, the points you were making all illustrate that it's been an adequate system, I would say, but by no means the perfect, and by no means adequate for the future, even if it's been adequate until now. So good reasons to be improving it. Good reasons to be improving it, and that we need to, I think the grids package has triggered the discussion about who's doing what. We need to do more at a pan-European level. We need to get those interlinkages clear, but that's not really taking away a lot of the roles of the experts. The experts who are there at national level today are definitely going to be needed in that conversation to build the planning of the future. So I think we can hopefully have dialogues that reassure people about those tensions, to say that no one's voice is going to be excluded. We're certainly not going to be proposing things that individual member states don't want to do. It has to be a collaborative exercise, but it's a collaborative exercise with a stronger European point of origin.
So before I bring the technical expertise and the member states, I would like to push you a little bit more. In this central scenario, do you think it should be binding, advisory, somewhere in between? It hasn't been agreed, but yeah, but what are your thoughts?
Can you recall what is the language in our proposal?
Clearly not.
Okay, so it's the idea is that with the 10-year network development plan, we've agreed it. It's been agreed with each time we do it. It gets agreed by member states. It then becomes the basis for individual system operators to be proposing projects, new infrastructure, new investments to their regulators, and say, look, this is a project, whether it's an interconnector or something domestic. It's been put into the 10-year network development plan. Therefore, it's been blessed as part of the bigger vision. So it's a legitimate investment, and therefore, Mr. Regulator, please let us raise the finance to build it. And I don't see that changing. So in a sense, I don't know whether one actually formally labels that binding or indicative. I'd have to check with my lawyers about that, but that's the role it plays.
Understood. So, François, you have been quiet for a while, so I'm bringing you to the conversation. France has a central planning, and like from my experience analyzing grids, like, the queues are the shortest in France. We saw it in the slides. So I think this central planning sort of works. What are your thoughts on having then two plans in parallel, or how would you see the Commission plan working with your plan?
That's a very good question. So maybe if you spare me, I will maybe just explain in a few words how we actually do these kind of things in France and in RTE, and then try to draw some, lessons or ideas for the European debate. So indeed, so first of all, thanks for pointing out that RTE is a state-owned company, because it is the case. It's a company with a number of public service missions, and it's very much rooted in the way we do the work. So indeed, it's always a bit strange for us when we hear in the European debate that, grid operators are private-seeking entities who only want to build assets for the sake of it. It's like so completely different from the way the company is run that it's always interesting to hear. But as part of our core missions, has really been developed in the recent years, this scenario modeling and prospective studies area. It's really something which has grown a lot in RTE in the recent years. And it's really part of our missions to, I would say, provide scientific-based information to public authorities in order to make informed decisions in terms of energy policies and other political decisions. So it's really how we think about that. And so we have developed quite a lot of in-house expertise for that. And basically, having done this, we come down to the conclusion that we actually really need three things to have, like, let's say, good quality prospective studies that can actually help take informed decisions for the future. The first, we need robust state-of-the-art modeling. Technical, economic modeling. Grids are complex technological objects. Could be that it's single most complex object that man has ever built, because it's so dense and has so many implications. So you need a very, very good modeling that really goes into the details of how the grid works. But that's not enough. You also need extensive consultation with stakeholders, because it's not only technical matter, and I think Sofie, your point really explained it very clearly. It's a political matter, it's a societal choices, so you need huge stakeholder involvement. That's something we do with, technical parties, energy companies, trade associations, consumers. We actually implemented quite recently a scientific advisory council with, let's say, respected scientific figures, and a parliamentary committee that allows a number of members of the French Parliament to actually discuss what are the hypotheses that we are exploring and what kind of scenarios we should look into. And the third thing that you need, because still it's not enough, is you need to have complex, detailed analysis of sensitivities. It's not about only trying to guess the future, it's really about testing what happens in different configurations and what are the best decisions you can take, no regret decisions, based on different possible pathways to the future. That's typically something we've done, exploring pathways to net zero by 2050. And you can see that there are different ones and there are trade-offs. They don't have the same economic implications, the same societal implications. So you need to explore all of that. And just to finish on the national side, because it's really important, in the latest studies, so whether it's the latest forecast by 2035 or in our grid planning scheme, which runs until 2040, we have looked into basically scenarios which are basically policy scenarios, and we have also looked into the reality, And the reality is that electrification is not picking up as fast as we hope it would or it should. And that's the reality that we see today. The electricity consumption curve is more or less flat. We have very good reasons to hope that it actually goes up, and I've talked about connection requests, but still, that's how it is today. And when you factor this in, it really gives you a different perspective in terms of what you need to build, because the trade-off that you have here is that you have to build the grid to enable these investments, but you don't have to build too much grid too much in advance, because this has a cost that has to be borne by consumers. And really, the analysis show that the overall cost of the system would go up quite significantly if we would build everything today, basically. And when you look then into more detail into grid planning and what we actually need to build. Basically, so now what we have is 3 priority levels. So we have first priority is basically that is no regret. It's, you know, very high industrial areas. We know that we have to do something, so we will do it no matter what. Then you have second priority areas. So basically you understand it's a bit less certain. And then you have third priority areas. And this is something where we say we cannot take a decision right now, and also in terms of procurement and everything, because it's just too early. And we have to really adapt in the future to make sure that we build at the right pace. Because once again, if you build too fast, it's additional cost for consumers. It's actually detrimental to the objective of electrification. So that's really where we stand today on national level. So now, when we look into the grids package and how it comes into the discussion, and the first point I would make is maybe that if you compare to these 3 criteria that I've described, I'm not 100% sure that the proposal from the Commission actually fully ticks the boxes. You know, state-of-the-art technical modeling is quite complex at the European level. Let's be honest about that. You cannot model the whole of the grid because it's too detailed. So basically, I don't think you can ever do it at European level. Maybe with AI, you know, a great tool will appear, but today is not the case. Extensive stakeholder consultation. Well, I mean, there's data inputs and so on, but the stakeholder consultation, which is actually quite developed within ENSOE, is not so much described. And then sensitivities analysis. Well, I mean, the whole idea is to have a central scenario. So here, I think it's kind of a different approach. So that's really what we see today. And I think we fully understand the need to have, like, let's say, a common vision at European level, like a reference point, and this is really important. Also for national planning, I didn't mention that, but when we do national studies, we look at what happens in all of Europe. And we do that because we have TONDP and the ENSOE data to help us do so. If we hadn't had that, I don't know how we can have a good view. But still, I mean, so you need to have this, but I think there's a limit to what you can expect from this central scenario. And I think your question was very relevant. Like, is it binding? Is it an indicative? Because in the end, grid infrastructure and grid planning, it's very much also driven by energy policy choices. You don't build the same grid if you have an energy mix which is A or B. And this is, as a matter of what is in the treaties today, a shared competency, and member states have the right to decide for energy mix. So here, I think you need to acknowledge for that. You need to acknowledge that, and you need to take into account the fact that you will need to have a dialogue. You need to have some form of coordination between national entities, between the European level, to make sure that this actually, ends up as something which is acceptable also by, consumers and stakeholders, and to make sure that it's robust. And here, I think, just to finish, because I've been too long, but just to finish on the point which was mentioned, I think it's very relevant to say that there is room for improvement today, and mostly in terms of how we can align hypotheses for electricity, gas, hydrogen. Today, these are indeed run by different bodies, and it really makes sense to have somewhere a forum where you say, okay, well, if you don't have the same hypothesis, you need to agree on something, you need to align. And here, this is typically something that can be steered by at European level by European Commission. So this would be really, I think, an improvement because we know that, the trajectories which are, let's say, in the papers a few years ago, maybe need to be updated.
I agree that you need, very detailed modeling. There was a blackout in Spain last year. That's the consequence of not planning your grid well or not operating your grid well. So, Sofie, you said earlier that Sweden is highly interconnected. You guys are, or were proud of being highly interconnected. You also have very, renewables, a lot of renewables in your energy mix. But I want to bring another element. You have significant, like a lot of north-south transmission installed. Like, I looked at the numbers, and there's more transmission between the north of Sweden and the south of Sweden than between France and any other countries. France with all the countries have more, but it's a lot of transmission. But still, there's some internal congestion and bidding some price differences. What is the relationship between the interconnections, the internal reinforcements, consumer outcomes, and how should we interpret congestion revenues? And we will use this as to transition, obviously.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot, and a very interesting discussion here, and going to have a lot to take home also. First of all, I just wanted to say also, I'm not representing the companies of Sweden in this. I'm representing the people in Sweden. So when I'm talking, that I do agree with you. Of course, there are companies earning a lot of money when the prices go up, but those aren't the ones that I am representing here in this discussion or in the European Parliament. I'm representing the people. But I do agree with you that of course we do need to have more redistribution of wealth in Sweden and in Europe and in the world, of course. Something that not maybe all of you know is that we have 4 bidding zones in Sweden. So we have 4 different prices for energy in our country. And usually before Aurora line, as I told you about before, there were practically always a lot cheaper in the northern parts of Sweden and a lot more expensive in the southern parts, because we have the energy production mostly in the northern parts of Sweden, and we have more people in the southern parts. And you know, the bidding zones, it's a good idea, because they are going to, the idea is to also drive more investments in energy production where it's needed. I would say that we haven't seen that yet in Sweden as we wanted to and as we thought it would, because, well, a lot of things happened. Maybe a culture debate about different energy types, about nuclear or renewables and everything, you know. So I think that's one of the reasons. But also maybe that the model didn't work as we wanted it to do. But I would also like to say that we do have bidding zones, but there's an elephant in the room, and that's Germany. They also have their energy production in the northern parts, and they have a lot of people in the southern parts, and they should have bidding zones, but they don't, and I can understand why. But that affects us. So I think that's also something that we have to have in this discussion, because if we are going to have these rules and these models with bidding zones, then everyone should follow that rule. And we had the bidding zone review last year that actually said, the German authorities themselves said that it would be more efficient for Germany to have the bidding zones, but I know politically it's a quite hard thing to do. But that affects us, because what we are doing is that we are exporting green energy and we are importing higher prices. So we're exporting southernmost and now also to Finland, and we're importing the higher prices. And you can guess that this is not something that people will like, of course. And I think that's the main thing here. And that when we are then hearing now in the grids package that we will have more top-down planning and so on, and I really appreciate you saying that the EU won't do anything without consent from the member states. That's of course great. But we do know when things move centimeter by centimeter, so that's why we are a bit skeptic to this. So yeah, I think it's important to see that, of course, we can have ideas on paper, that's good, but they also need to work in reality. And what we have seen is that all of the member states has to follow the same rules then. We can't have that some member states do and some don't. And I also want to say that this is, of course, not the Commission's fault. So you always get the blame for everything, and it's not righteous to give that to you, because it's a member state the responsibility. Also, I want to say, to make sure that you can produce the energy that your own country needs. I think that's important. And of course, we do want to, and we need to fast and much faster than we are, you know, getting rid of the fossil energy, and especially from Russia. But we also need to see that every member state takes its own responsibility for its own energy production.
Thank you so much for that.
And we will come to the congestion.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't take that one, no. But
yeah, it's okay. Yeah, we'll have time for that.
Yeah.
So the cross-border interconnectors, which is the thing that Sweden was very pro, and now maybe they don't know, create differences in countries, but may impact different countries, but the cost and the infrastructure may be somewhere else. So the package also raises questions about cost-benefit analysis for these new interconnectors and cross-border cost allocation as well. Tom, we said earlier that like planning and permitting are concerns for delay, but also disputes over who pays are causes of delay of interconnection. What is the Commission proposing to make the cost allocation more predictable and workable?
Thanks. Perhaps just to start off, to come back to a basic point, the reason we want interconnections, the reason there are about 41 gigawatts of missing interconnections is because the interconnections are basically, they're facilitating trade. So everything we learnt about the macroeconomics of trade policy and that trade is mutually beneficial applies to energy as well. So we are constrained at the moment because electricity needs grids to flow on. So if you increase the grids, you're increasing the possibility of trade, which is mutually beneficial. When it comes to individual interconnections, there may be a system benefit to that interconnection, and I'm sure that's the case in Sweden and Finland, but you're very right that there are very significant local impacts. These can be distributional, economic, social, and one way that we'd come up with on an ad hoc bottom-up basis before was to say, okay, look, a cross-border project, there can be benefits on both sides, so let's try to work out if we can split the cost 50-50. That's a pretty crude approach, but I don't know of examples where we actually got any more sophisticated than that. But the idea is, and that's what's in the proposal, that we should be a bit more nuanced or sophisticated in our understanding of where these benefits will flow. On the one, I mean, and again, perhaps the nature of interconnections has changed because it used to be, okay, from country A to country B, that you get those flows, that's pretty simple calculus. But these days, for instance, to take the offshore cases, there's a lot of multiple countries involved in offshore projects. But then, to take Germany as a case, developing offshore resources in Germany has implications. It should have implications for southern Germany, but for everyone else around the Baltic, it has implications for their loop flows and the levels of curtailment. It affects the system beyond those just interconnections. So to develop a process whereby you reflect on the implications of that interconnector and see what does that mean in terms of the system impacts and where the benefits and costs are, and then reflect that in a formula of how we share the costs of building it. That just seems only sensible. And I think it could also touch on the distributional aspects, because that's one of the factors that gets clearly impacted by interconnections. If you do see a big impact saying, look, this is great for Europe, it's great to have this interconnection, and it means Nord Pool countries overall will have a much better result, but there are clear market distributional consequences locally. Can we work out a way to factor that in to the cost benefit sharing? If prices are going to rise in Sweden, then that's a negative consequence. Can that be factored into the discussion of how we're sharing infrastructure costs and somehow compensated? So that's the kind of conversation we need to have and move beyond the classic and fairly crude practices of the past.
I want to bring François into the conversation as well, talking about like internal grid reinforcements and how they can help like a European flow. Because France is in the middle of a lot of countries, and maybe, you know, some solar exports from Spain can make their way to Germany, but that means that the French network needs some reinforcement there, and they're not necessarily. So my question is, under which conditions should internal lines benefit from the funding from the European Commission?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Maybe I will start with a few more general remarks, also coming back to part of the discussion, and then answer your question. But yeah, indeed.
Like a politician.
No, but let's say from a technical point of view, we build interconnections because they have benefits. And I think, Tom, you explained it very rightly, but I think we really need to keep that in mind. We don't build interconnectors for the sake of it. We build interconnectors because we have economic benefits. And this has been demonstrated. I think the figures from all the benefits from flow-based market coupling, basically, and the way we can pool resources within Europe, and each hour, each quarter minute, call for the lowest, the units with the lowest costs is a very clear benefit. We have a benefit in terms of security of supply. For France, typically we had in 2022 a complicated year, and imports from our neighbors really helped us go throughout the year. And we also have obviously benefits in terms of renewables integration and sustainability and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So this is all very clear. But I think we're reaching a point where, the system has changed so much that to some extent I would argue that we have done a lot of, let's say, the most obvious investments in terms of interconnectors, and now we're facing maybe a bit more complex issues at hand. And here, I think really we need to keep in mind that it's still an individual investment decision and to take based on a detailed analysis. So I say that because, I think earlier in the slides you showed the idea that we have an interconnector target at European level. So we have X% that we need to reach. And this is something that still puzzles me, like, what does it mean to have an interconnector target? And furthermore, what does it mean when the target, because it's a percentage, is relative to the installed capacity? We're in a system where we're developing renewables very rapidly, so installed capacity increases a lot. And to some extent, we set ourselves a target that say, for each gigawatt of renewables, we should install X% gigawatt of interconnectors. For me, it's not really how we should think about that. We need really to have a detailed analysis. And when I say that we are reaching a tipping point, it's also because when you look at our system in France, but I think it's really the case in many countries, we actually need to look into what do we need to accommodate additional flows. Coming from our neighbors or going through our neighbors, we need to make sure that these electrons can actually flow within the grid. And for that, we need to strengthen them. We need additional investment within the borders of a country to make sure that the electrons, let's say, imported from country A, can actually either reach consumers within your country or be exported at the same time to another country. In the case for France, you mentioned it, we showed that in the recent times, more than 90% of the time that France is importing from Spain. Spain has a lot of renewables, so in terms of economic situation, it makes sense, exports from Spain to France, but more than 90% of the time, we export at the same time to our eastern border, so Germany, Belgium, and so on. So that means that basically we're building grids for transiting electrons from Spain to Germany. And okay, but that's a completely, I think, different stories from what the one we used to have a few years ago. France has done a lot. I like to recall this figure because I think for me it's quite striking. So we are the second largest interconnected country in Europe. We are breaking records year after year, more than 90 terawatt-hours of electricity exported to our neighbors. So that's more than the consumption of all of Belgium. That's quite significant. But still, we're reaching this kind of tipping point. And here, so basically, it's kind of coming back to what I was mentioning before. We need to look in details into what the grids need to accommodate these flows. And what they need is additional investment, basically. You can have smart solutions, but I think there's a limit to that. So you need additional investment. And so what that means that first you need a framework that enables this kind of technical studies, detailed analysis to be performed, to be shared between different countries, with the European Commission as well. And then you need to make sure that when you're dealing about cost allocation, because that was your question, you make sure that you actually take into account all of the costs, because it's no longer sufficient to look at the cost for the line that crosses the border. You need to take into account of what the whole project cost is. And that's kind of a different picture. So I think this is something, I think it's kind of being relatively well established in the expert debate, but still I think we need to make sure that it's really fully apprehended, because otherwise we'll be stuck in dead ends with, stakeholders, political representatives not agreeing to building assets if they are, if part of the costs are, just only spread to consumers without compensation.
Yeah, just maybe to add to that, I mean, I fully agree what you said. You mentioned the transit flows. I mean, I hope this is I think what many people have in mind, no? Like this division of Europe that basically the electrons flow from beyond one country, no? So it is true. It's a paradigm shift, but I hope at least this is the one we want to go to. And maybe Sofie, you mentioned Germany as one of the bottlenecks when it comes to the zones. I think this is a lot of experts I think agree on that. There's even now plenty of studies that even show that even the southern German zone would profit.
Not sure about that though.
No, but that's because they are efficiency. So you can if you split the zones, you can actually save. You don't only save on redispatch and all these like operational things, but you also save actually on certain investments. And so the costs go down by an amount that even the prices in the southern zone would actually would fall. So but they're political realities, and it's what it is. And on the companies in Sweden, I never meant that you will represent them. I just meant the money is not gone. And if, for instance, if the Swedish consumers pay more, that means that this is partially also there's congestion revenues obviously occurred, and then there are companies that actually earn this money. So the money, you're a politician, you can maybe also think whether there's solutions on, if there's an issue, maybe there are also solutions to that.
Yeah. So yeah, go for congestion.
That was a perfect bridge, the most perfect bridge I've had, I think, in this European situations. So the congestion fees and congestion revenues.
Can you explain just what it is, just in case?
I'm going to. Absolutely. First of all, I would like to say, because we're talking about a lot of things here, you mentioned the flow-based. What's it called? The flow-based market coupling. Where we, when we implemented that in Sweden, the costs were higher. When we implemented the capacity tariffs, the costs went higher for people. When we have more interconnections, the costs are higher for people. And then we have the congestion fees, what I am also going to explain what they are, that also raises the costs. So we have a lot of things that comes from the European Union that we need to do in Sweden that have risen the costs in our country. So what we want to do now is to use these congestion fees, these congestion revenues, which occur when we have imbalance between bidding zones. So when we have that congestion, it always sounds gross when you're talking about it, because at least me, only thinking about constipation, but I guess that's what it is. So when that occurs, then a fee is taken on the consumers. And today we can only use this money for investments to get rid of constipation of congestion. We can only use
traffic jams and cars. That might be a better.
That's a better. Thank you. So it's a traffic jams with cars, and we can only use this money for investments that would get rid of the congestion. And that's. I know the logic behind this, but today, and also in the grids package from the Commission, are proposing that 25% of these congestion fees will be used for common projects, as Aurora Line I talked about before. Today, Sweden is approximately 2.6% of EU inhabitants, and 55% of unused congestion revenues is Swedish money. So you can guess that we do not want 25% of this money, which is our money, to be used for common European projects. We want to use this money for Swedish interests, and we want to use them more flexibly because of all of these things that we have been talking about. When prices are going up because of interconnection, because of flow-based because of capacity tariffs, because of everything we know, we want to use this money that Swedish consumers already has been paying for maybe cutting net tariffs when prices are skyrocketing, or maybe to just sending out some money in support in the darkest and coldest months of the year. So we want to use, and also to use them for energy production. So we can have more energy production in the southern parts of Sweden, so we can in that way lower the costs. and also get rid of the congestion. So that is one of the things that we, from the Swedish part, I would say very broadly from different parties, are rooting for and trying to get support for, that we want to use this money more flexibly because of all of the things that we have been talking today, to hire, to get a better public acceptance for the grid's investments and for interconnections, because now it's like that you are making a meal for a dinner for your friends. You have been paying for all of the ingredients, you have made the dinner, and then you're going to pay them to come to eat also. And that's how the Swedish public is viewing this, that we are just, the cost is going up and up and up, and our money, we can't even use them for what we want. And of course we shouldn't take this money and use them for anything, build a school or something. That's not what I'm saying. We should use them, of course, to make sure that congestion is getting rid of, both in investments in the grids, because we are also planning for that, of course, because that's the rules. But we want to have some flexibility to also to have more energy production in the southern parts of Sweden, but also to have some kind of flexibility to use them when the energy prices are at the highest. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for explaining that. It was super clear. Yeah, just some more context for the audience. Congestion revenues, they're generally used, like in other countries, like between two countries, they're generally used to lower tariffs. That's how congestion revenues are used in Europe. So yeah, it's not only Sweden doing it, it's everywhere. But yeah, because this proposal of like taking part of that to finance interconnectors, right?
Sorry.
Because of the you're making the point because of the proposal of the Commission to take a part of that.
Actually, we have been making this point before the grids package came, because we wanted this flexibility even before, because there's so much money piled up, because we're not that big of a country in population. So it takes a while to make sure these investments can be used to get rid of congestions. Always a hard time. I'm always saying constipation. So we have been talking about that even before, that we need the and we did get the flexibility in 22.
Okay,
to use them for our support. Yeah.
Good to know. I do want to open the panel for Q&A in 3 minutes. So hopefully this will be a quick one. We've been hinting at it, but we haven't really said that delays in achieving the energy union will come at a cost for like competitiveness, security of supply, and all these other things that are not necessarily quantifiable. And that any decision that we take today will take years, because then it has to be approved by the parliament, maybe by each member state parliaments, and that takes years. So, Tom, maybe I'm going to ask this question just to you. What are the easy wins for the negotiation of this grid package? Or how can we implement this as fast as possible, really?
My impression is that we're nearly there. We've got council coming up soon, and they're going to come up with a common position. ITRE is finalising its view on the congestion revenues. There's been a lot of discussion and some solutions already put on the table. At the scope of expenditure, I don't know if that's still on the table. Probably. So I think we're very close to agreements there, and in a sense, this is a nice example of fast European legislation. We proposed it in December, and we'll have a result before December. So that's pretty good going in terms of legislative process. But perhaps a point to make related to the grids package, but also to all the other legislation which is out there. Member states can be taking action that's consistent with, but independent of, waiting on the European word on these things. And I mean, RT is a great example, and France is a good example here, that you're not waiting. It didn't need the new European voice to tell you to review the connection charges regime, to review the tariff regime and make sure tariffs are sending the right signals, to review the accounting regimes to be sure that you're only charging through the network tariff what you must do, and you're moving other costs elsewhere. There's all sorts of things that we've been putting out in Commission communications, in action plans, another one coming soon, in roadmaps, in guidance notes, in network codes. There's a lot of good practice out there. Member states can all be picking that up and doing it already. So it will be good when we get the grids package. That will be, then it's clear in law, and we'll go through the implementation phase, as you say. But it's we like anticipatory investments. We also like anticipatory policy implementation.
Great, amazing. So yeah, member states can take initiative as well. Happy to open the panel for Q&A. You can just unblock your microphone to ask a question.
Hi, thanks for an interesting debate. So this question is directed to Alexander and Sofie. So I read you that obviously electricity prices rising in Sweden is a big hurdle for Sweden and also for other similar countries. And you, Alexander, mentioned distribution mechanisms as a way. So by distribution, I mean distribution between consumers and producers. So when prices go up, consumers pay, electricity producers gain more revenue, obviously. Is there any idea of like a common tax where that would be implemented in all countries in the EU or anything like that? That would obviously be good also for not deterring investment in certain countries that want to impose a tax on electricity producers. Was my question clear?
Extra tax or?
No, what I'm talking about is a tax on electricity production. So the increased revenue for Vattenfall and similar companies, that could be used as a way to compensate consumers. And if there are ideas of doing that jointly in different several countries or all countries in the EU.
Thank you. I would say, if I'm not mistaken, we did have a kind of that in 22, or maybe if it was 23, I'm not sure. We have that kind of like extra tax on over earnings from energy production, and different member states did it a bit in different ways. I'm not that happy about how we did it in Sweden. I'm in opposition in Sweden because we didn't get almost anything because they put it very low, so we didn't get anything. But I think that's a good proposal to make it again, and I think it's good to do it jointly. But of course, the revenues should be national. But I think that's one thing to look at also going forward.
Doing what's different to us?
No, sorry.
Yeah, I'm also not aware of any European initiative, but I mean, what Sofie said, you can try to tax them with windfall profits. I mean, it's probably not straightforward to do that, and of course, the big issue is that obviously we have consumers in one country profiting, while consumers in another country are disadvantaged, and in between we have also companies. Actually, there are some profiting and some are actually losing out. If you want to talk about this, we have the congestion revenues, but probably this is not enough. So there is the easy way out. I mean, I'm not taxation expert, I have to say. Maybe this is somebody else in the audience when we can say on that. I guess it's probably difficult though to tax only a few companies specifically, but yeah.
Thank you. Shaheen Valeh from DGRP. I had three quick questions. One, you kind of touched on it, but haven't really used the word. I was surprised that you didn't discuss more market design. And, 2-3 years ago, there was a very intense debate about this, and now it seems that we've kind of put this to rest. And I'm wondering if we truly have, because I think the debate around whether merit order marginal pricing is the best to allocate short-term electricity is kind of, settled. But I don't know if the debate whether this is the right price signal for long-term investment is fully settled. And so I would love to hear you on that. Second, I would love to hear your assessment of Repower EU. There were, grand ambitions when this plan was announced, and from my vantage point, we haven't achieved very much with it. So I would love to be proven wrong. It seems that, when I look at countries like Italy, for instance, it doesn't seem like any of the NGU or Repower EU money has basically helped to reduce fossil fuel dependency, for instance. So, I mean, isn't this the sign of a failure somewhere? And finally, we seem to assume that we are going to build our electricity system as if technology is always immediately available across the spectrum, which is not the case. So what we're observing today is that we have a much faster ramp up of renewables than we have of dispatchable power, and we have a much faster ramp up of renewables than we have of installed storage capacity. And so I'm wondering whether in this grids package we're paying enough attention to this friction between efficiency and stability of the grid. And it seems that we have, grid efficiency as a high priority, which we should, but I'm wondering if we're not also setting ourselves for a system that could be a lot less stable with potential, increased risks of blackouts and others. So I'd love to hear you on that. Thank you.
Anyone wants to take?
Yeah, I can start, but I don't think I will cover RepowerEU because that's a bit outside of my remit. But just to on market design, I think, what you mentioned resonates very well, I think, with our current way of thinking. I would not say it's a TSO mission per se necessarily to provide like very detailed inputs in terms of market design options. However, what is clear, in my opinion, is that we need somewhere a system that reconciles the view of system costs on one hand and system prices or electricity prices on the other hand. And this is indeed very much needed because it was mentioned before. I think it was you, Eva, that said that we are going to a system which is very much capex heavy, and still short-term prices are driven by OPEX. So here, I think you have different types of instruments that can help reconcile short-term versus long-term. I think there were kind of basically what the market design reform boiled down to in the end. But here, I think there's a question of, in terms of implementation, have we actually implemented enough of these tools for long-term hedging of prices for consumers? Question mark. I think there's still some progress to be made. Then obviously market design is not only about that. We also need to take into account adequacy, and here for capacity mechanisms, I think they are needed and they will be needed in the future. So still, if we can, I would say, streamline and simplify all the framework around that, I think that would be very helpful. And also other costs for reserves and these kind of things. And then that kind of comes down to the third question. We do see a number of costs increasing in terms of managing grid stability, and we have to make sure that they're fairly allocated to consumers. And indeed, on your third point, I think it's very, very relevant what you mentioned. We are seeing system operation changing very dramatically compared to what it was a few years ago. And when you go to the control room, to our RT control room, but it's the same for all of our, let's say, fellow TSOs, grid operators, dispatchers, they're really saying this is completely different from what they used to do a few years ago. And basically, so if I take the example of France, a few years ago or historically, the main driver or the main, I would say, risk element in our thinking was cold wave. What happens if there is a cold wave? Then you have a peak electricity demand, and how do you accommodate that? Now, the main driver for risk is the situation. It's basically Easter weekend. It's a situation with low demand and high renewables production and injection into the grid. And how do you accommodate that? And for that, you need different operational tools. You need different market considerations. And I think we can really improve in terms of how renewables also contribute to grid stability and in terms of responding to price signals, and in terms also of providing ancillary services like conventional generators do. I think this is very much needed. And I think it's kind of understood also by renewables actors, because I think they really understand the fact that once renewables are becoming a major part of the electricity system, it's only natural that they also have some kind of obligations or, play the rules, like I would say the normal rules of the electricity system. But in the end, and I think this is very, very true, we need to all acknowledge the fact that security has a cost as well. And what I mean by that is that basically the main principle for operating the grid is N-1. That is saying at every moment you are looking into what happens if you lose part of the grid, an asset, a line, and you need to make sure that everything runs smoothly, even if this incident occurs. And by definition, that means that you're not using 100% of the grid, because if you're using 100% of the grid, if something happens, then you are in a very complicated situation. So this is something that has to be acknowledged, and there is indeed, I would argue, a limit to efficiency efforts. Obviously, TSOs have to be efficient operators, of course, and it's a job of the regulator to make sure that they are, steered into that direction, but it has to have a limit, and this limit is system security.
Yeah, I realize maybe the market design question is a bit outside of the remit of the panel, unless, Tom or Alexander want to tackle. So
I can pick it up briefly. Your memory is correct. There were extensive discussions of electricity market design. The world's academics and ministers and everybody weighed in, and we feel that it was a very good discussion, and it concluded clearly that marginal cost pricing for dispatch is very efficient, and that this is the regime we want to stick with. And that was the essence of our legislative proposal, which was adopted and, as you say, now needs implementing. So there are other dimensions to electricity market design beyond the marginal cost pricing element. There's the hedging, there's the cross-border connectivity, the rollout of a PPA market, the use of proper good two-way contracts for difference. These are all elements of making sure that there's both a good efficient price signal for dispatch, but also measures taken to reflect longer-term investment needs. Having said that, there are still broader issues. We're not calling them market design because we don't want to open market design, but when it comes to bidding zones and the future post-bidding zone review, broader issues of how we expect the market to develop in the long term, there we think there is a discussion to be had, and that's why we're preparing a white paper, which will come out sometime, I think, this year, to start at a broader long-term discussion. But that's not necessary. That's not going to be related to electricity market design, which is shorthand for efficient dispatching price signals, which we think are working well. Briefly on Repower EU, I would say I think it does work well. We're happy with the reduction in Russian gas consumption, and we're happy with the massive the reductions in peak load that have happened, the rollout of efficiency, and the record levels of investment in renewables and in storage and batteries. So in that sense, we do think it's working well. There might be individual cases it's been less efficient. So I think that's in the Italian case, it's curious. On the one hand, Italy has had a record level of investment in storage and batteries, but somehow, unlike in Spain, they don't seem to be playing a very good role in pushing gas out from a price-setting role. And I'm not sure what's going on in the storage flexibility balancing markets there that's not working as it should be in Italy. But we can dive into the issue of Italian flexibility markets in another session. And then lastly, on grid stability issues, it's true it's become more complicated, but firstly, the engineers of this world have been discussing these topics for 20 years and anticipating them. And the security and the stability of the grid is in the DNA of people like you, in every system operator, every energy regulator, every energy minister is obsessed, in a good way, with security and stability of the grid. So in that sense, the fact that the risks are changing is not just arbitrary weather, it's not just arbitrary football matches that are causing disruptions to our nice, stable supply and demand. There are other parameters there. But we do have AI and computers these days which are capable of managing this. I remember discussions in one country's grid where they were pulling their hair out because they really didn't think they could manage with 3% PV penetration in their grid. And so I have faith in our engineers' capacity to work through these and to come up with the solutions which keep the grids working perfectly well, as they have been. The disruptions we've been having, it's like on the cyber side, that the attacks we've been having haven't been triggered by unexpected sunsets where we lose solar power or cyber attacks. There have been things like, the cyber attacks have been non-digital things like anchors dragging across the seafloor or someone bashing in a Berlin substation. So we can anticipate and think about these more complicated worlds and cyber issues. But today we're coping very well even with the old-fashioned physical world.
Thank you so much. I think that's it. If you have questions, there's like a 15-minute break now, and I'm sure you can find the panelists and ask them whatever is on your mind. I will just finish saying that, yeah, thankfully, all the panelists agree that this energy union is something that we want to implement as fast as possible because of security of supply, competitiveness, economic growth. Time is money, but yeah, it has to be done right. But as Tom said at the end, there's good progress. So hopefully we'll get this before a year. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it wasn't going to be in July. It was the same people also writing the network charges proposal, so they got distracted by that. So
This coming with the actually I know the electrification. Okay, yeah. July. Yeah. Because I think on the Commission work program was like Q4 25 or something, Q1.
yeah,
But then it was just like
which is fine. Plenty of things we should be concentrating on.
yeah, absolutely. But it's as power nerds, that's just the Commission is thinking of what the next
I know